Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today we have a really exciting model, and this is going to be the first part of a two-part series where I take you through how to paint Lorgar Aurelian from the Horus Heresy range, of course, Primarch of the Word Bearers, and you can see the finished model here. This tutorial is going to deal with the armour, and it's going to deal with the silvers as well, and then the second video, which will come along kind of in a week after this one drops. The second video is going to be looking at all the other little bits, but once we've got the armor done and the metallics done, or the silvers done, we've really done most of the model. This is if you're kind of entering into the world of Horus Heresy, this is actually a fairly straightforward Primarch to do. One of the simpler ones that I've done before. Slightly older sculpts as well. And slightly smaller than all the other Primarchs, but still a joy to paint. So this is going to be just over 20 minutes, this video, and I'm going to take you through kind of what I did to be able to paint him. So I started with a 50-50 mix of Hydra Turquoise and black. Now, you could probably miss this step out. The reason I did this was I wanted a contrasting colour in the base of the reds, but I think that realistically my reds were not, the reds that went down, I think kind of overlapped this so much that you couldn't tell that I'd used kind of like a dark desaturated turquoise within the shadows of the model. So I think that you can miss this step out, but if you really feel the need to follow along exactly, a 50-50 mix of the two. And actually, kind of just a note on color theory, I'm going to be using lots of color theory throughout this video, looking at all sorts of ways to contrast the colors from the base to the model itself, as well as the metallics, etc. So, but we'll kind of, I'll talk about those steps as we go through. So we're going to give this a pre-highlight now. Some people call this a pre-shade, but I'm not really sure why they call it a pre-shade, because you're highlighting. So I call it a pre-highlight, and we're just going to go with pure white from the Army Painter. This is a really nice white here. And what I would say about this is that really focus on the direction that the light is coming from. You can see the 45-degree angle just on that shoulder pad in particular, and then just on his left-hand side of his torso as well, where the light is directly striking. So it's just at a slight angle from the directional light, and then we've got a light source coming from the rear as well. Now I stuck the cape and the cloak on. I regretted it as I was painting it, but I was worried that if I stuck it on later, because of the way that it can be seen, I was worried that I would get that horrible kind of super glue misting that you often get. So we're going to go with Rebel Red now, which is kind of designed, I guess, as a word bearer's kind of style paint from the Army Painter. So it's a great one to kind of start with, but we will use another red to really up the brightness on this. If you want a darker red, you could always just use this, and this could just be for your infantry. This could just be the recipe that you use, and actually using that turquoise underneath is kind of perfect, really, because you're kind of maximising the contrast when you're considering your colour theory. You know, you've got reds and contrasting them with the turquoise within the darkness of the armour. But I like to think of the word bearers almost like a wine red kind of colour. But one thing I would say for them is that it doesn't seem particularly uniform to me, the word bearers colour. You've got the official GW colour, but I've seen them from the range from really bright red to very, very dark kind of wine red before. So we're going to go with Aurelian somewhere in the middle. It's going to appear super bright, certainly when we do the next stage. So just stick with it though, because we're going to kind of get that wine red look back eventually. But as I say, this could be a really decent kind of tabletop recipe for your word bearers if you just wanted to use this. So over to the next step, we're going to do some further highlights now with our white again. And we're going to be a little bit more precise with these highlights. You can see here, I'm just being really quite careful. Now, I know that it appears that I'm hitting quite a lot of the armour, but remember, I'm actually hitting quite a lot of the metallic plate. And so just focus, just have your mind on where is it hitting on the actual red of the armour on this highlight, rather than kind of where is it hitting the overall model. That's a really critical thing. You've got to beware of that as you're painting, particularly Primarchs, but all models. Where will the trim start and end, and where will the highlights start and end as well? So something to consider. So it looks quite white, it's quite a broad highlight, but when you're considering actually, lots of that is going to be covered up with metallics. Actually, it's relatively quite tight. So we're going to go with pure red now, just for those tippity top highlights. And I'm really just going over these white elements rather than going over the entire model itself. I'm just really focusing on those white elements that I went over. And then you can see that we've got the fade and the contrast in the models, where we go from that kind of very dark red in the shadows and then this kind of bright popping red. Now, you saw the model at the very beginning and how kind of almost like wine red that will become. That, this is nowhere near it. And that's because we'll use lots of matte varnishes, and we're going to use oil paints as well to knock it back. But in the next step, we're also going to knock that back as well. So we're going to, those quite broad highlights that we've created, we're going to knock back. So we're going to use some speed paint now, 50-50 Tyrian Navy and blood red. Almost creates a purple colour. And I'm just hitting this in the shadows. So I'm being quite tight with the airbrush, and then just hitting it in the darkest areas. And then this is going to maximize contrast on our model, but we will further develop that contrast when it comes to kind of the brush elements. Now, I would say the brush elements that we do a little bit later are optional. You could keep everything. If you wanted a relatively quick Primarch job, you could keep everything just done with the airbrush, particularly with this model. I don't necessarily think you need to do things like edge highlights for it still to look good, but I've just I've just made those highlights a little bit finer with some brushwork a little bit later on. So over to our oils. We're going to use emerald green, Prussian blue, and I will use some Payne's grey in a bit as well. Now, I don't need to create an enormous pot of this because it's just a singular model, so I just use a Tupperware, like a takeaway container for this. And I'm just mixing the oils with a bit of white spirit. It didn't take long to dry after this gone down. You can just hit it with a hairdryer as well. I would always advise just doing it on the back of the leg, somewhere that's not going to be seen. You can see when it went down, I was like, whoa, that's way too blue. So I've just added a little bit of Payne's grey, which is a Dowler and Rowney colour, but loads of companies do Payne's grey oils. Payne's grey is just a pretty standard colour. So I've really tried to darken it down. But again, we're using that idea of contrast using colour theory within this model, which is that I could pin wash it with a black and that'd be fine. But I really want to try and maximise contrast within it by using some colour theory. So using a blue, which will contrast nicely against the reds of the armour as well. I think that there's an argument I could use a bit more green in here to really kind of like up the contrast in terms of colour theory. But you could just use black or brown depending on whatever you have. I just have quite a broad range of different coloured oil paints, but just use what you have, because in reality I think by the end of it, black, blue, Payne's grey, you just want to darken those recesses, particularly with this awesome kind of like Colchis script work within the armour. But one thing I would say, that because it appeared in the previous step that we've gone really bright with those highlights, those oils will knock everything back so much. It will just stain the armour and darken it down. And that's just something to bear in mind, which is why I'd suggest doing further kind of brush highlights just to bring back a little bit of the luster of the armour, because of the way that the oils settle within the Colchisian script work. It will just knock back the whole thing. If you're limited on oil paints, I'd really suggest grabbing some others. Greens and blues, always really, really useful. particularly on models like Primarchs, bigger models where you can really do some painting flexes on them, and really kind of lean into that color theory. It's harder to tell, I think, with smaller models, Mark 3, Mark 6 that we've got recently. But with these bigger models, it's really worth thinking about how can I maximize contrast on them? How can I use color in interesting ways as well? And you can see here, just with a clean cotton wool bud, I'm just going over the entire model, just trying to bring back some of those highlights, maybe where I've brushed over them and I didn't mean to, just ensuring that I'm just bringing back some of the red within that armour. One thing I would say though, just be careful of fibres, because you'll see in the video a little bit later, I've caught in the matte varnish some of the fibres. Now I was able to pick them away and pick them off, but you could use alternatively like a small sponge for this, like a makeup sponge or something like that, that are designed specifically to kind of for this job of wiping away things. I'm going to use matte varnish here. Now later on I actually use 50-50 matte varnish and satin varnish, just to bring some of the chroma and the luster of the armour. I felt like the matte really kind of killed the chroma, and by that I just mean the brightness, the vividness of the red. So I added a little bit of satin later on into this after this process. So this is what it looks like so far. So we've got some highlights, but they've been really killed by what we've done with the oils. So I'm just going to take some of that pure red that we were using before. This is an air paint. It's not like a normal kind of war paint or acrylic paint. And I'm just going to add a little bit of white into it. So it's going to make this kind of like pinky color, and that's okay. That is what we want. Now, pure red goes on the areas we're just highlighting the top of these Colchissian ruins. This goes into the darkest areas essentially, so you can see that I'm not hitting with this pure red, and this is just pure red. I'm not hitting the tippity top highlights. This is just me highlighting the bits where we hit it with that Tyrian Navy. Now what I'm starting to do is add a little bit more white into that mix. And as I'm going further and further, higher and higher up that shoulder pad where that highlight was created, I'm then adding more and more white, where I'm just picking out tippity top highlights, picking out some of the edges on the ruins as well. Now this will further highlight your model, but it just brings out the ruins a little bit further. You don't need to do this on every single ruin. Certainly behind the legs, you're not going to see that because they're hidden by the cloak, so you don't necessarily need to do that. But I think certainly on the front of the model, or where the light hits, you can see me picking out some of the hairs there, where the light hits, this is definitely worth the time investment to do. This will take 20 minutes to do the entire model, because it's sculpted in such a way that actually it's relatively easy to do. Now you don't need to edge highlight all around the Colchissian ruins, just where the bottoms of them, and sometimes the top of them as well, where the light hits. And you can see me hitting with this matte spray and satin varnish, so 50-50, just to bring it. It will appear still matte, but it will not remove the chroma of the colour. So you can see as well the highlights on the feet in particular that I've reinforced on this, and the top of the shoulder pad as well. So I've just gone over the entire model using that kind of that same process, but yeah, focus on the feet in particular. That's going to draw quite a lot of attention because we're going to have a green glow on that a little bit later. So shining silver. So we're going to do the metallics now. Metallics often are the trickiest part, I think, on a Primarch, because there's often loads of it. My advice is, rather than starting necessarily on with a dark base, is try and start on a medium to light silver or gold, and then darken it down from there. I've been more successful doing it that way. So this is shiny silver. This is the air paint. It might take a couple of goes to get decent coverage, but you basically cover the entire model in that shining silver. Now this is our mix, our navy that we had before, our Tyrian Navy and dark tone, which is basically a black wash. But I've also got a little bit of brown paint on there. That's oak brown, just on the left-hand side. And I've mixed those 3 paints together with some airbrush medium. Now, the airbrush medium has some flow improver in, so it will help the wash to flow. And what I'm going to do this is just like I would any other wash. I'm just going to use it all over. Now, I've used blue partly within the steel to reflect, say, the sky. You know, blue steels are absolutely, you know, something. They're absolutely classics when painting. But I've made it desaturated. I've desaturated that blue by adding in those browns, but also by adding in the black wash. So this is a great way, or a great wash, if you're thinking about doing kind of some steels. And this was quite an organic process when I did this. I was kind of like, oh, what should I mix together? You know, should I add more brown into it? Should I add more blacks into it, etc., etc. But I just settled on this kind of, you know, 1-to-1-to-1 mix, but airbrush thin with an awful lot of airbrush thinner. But what this also can do is act as a glaze, and I'll show you a little bit later how we use this as a glaze. But essentially, I wash the entire model with this mix. Rather, all of the silvers with this mix. I've been quite precise, but quite careful. Now, this is where we enhance the process. Now, I've got a little bit of silver, shining silver, and you know, try and go as bright silver as we possibly can here. But I'm going to reinforce the shadows here on the model. And what I'm doing is just where the light can't get to on these silvers, you know, the bottom of the knee pads, the side of that armour, on the chest, I'm just dragging it over those areas to reinforce the shadows. Now that pop from the silvers and then the matte from where you've gone over with this wash a couple of times, because it will be a matte finish, creates real depth to the armour. You can see me just going over the rivets here, just being careful. And it's worth spending time on the metallics on this particular model because there's an awful lot of them. You only really got 1 or 2 metallic kind of colours. We're going to use gold later, but silver. So it's really worth taking the time to make this right. So you can see me just reinforcing the rivets on all the elements here. You saw me going back over the under the knee pad and just using this as essentially as a glaze. You know, the bottom of that shoulder pad, following the lights of the armour. So you can see there where the highlight on the red hits, that's where our silver element is going to be brightest. So we don't want to hit it further with the wash from there. And you can see me going backwards and forwards, going over bits that I've missed or going over bits that need to be reinforced. I'm trying to hit here the underside of those metal piping because the underside is going to be in shadow. So it'd be really nice to have a transition from the top of the piping where it's nice and bright to the underneath the piping where it's really dark. And again, going back over so for a 3rd or 4th time on that chest area to essentially create a very dark black blue where you can't see any of the silvers underneath at all. And using that matte element with these washes that you've created is a really great way to add depth to those metallics. I want to include as much footage of this process so you can see me doing this. Again, this is quite an organic process, but I've mapped it out as I was airbrushing, and you know, I was saying to myself, okay, this is where I'm going to need the highlight on the silver, this is where the highlight's coming in on the chest, that means that this is going to be the brightest part of our silver, etc., etc. So this is our shining silver that we were using before, and obviously it's going to be a bit brighter now than everything that's on there because we've given the entire model a wash with that Tyrian Navy black mix. So the shining silver is going to be a natural highlight now, and you can see me just coming in, doing a few of the edges, picking out some key details, doing the edges of the armour, reinforcing the highlights on the part where the light is hitting, where it marries up and matches up with that red. And there might be going backwards and forwards with this. You might go, oh, whoops, I've slipped my brush, my silver brush or silver paint onto an area that should have been that wash, or it doesn't look like a natural transition. And where it doesn't look like a natural transition, we can just go with some thinned wash again and just go over that area just to make sure that it's the transition between the two is nice and smooth. But one thing I would say about metallics is that they're quite forgiving in terms of doing smooth transitions. You know, it's easier to do smooth transitions on metallics than it is to say doing it with three different acrylic paints that are brighter than each other. Metallics is a great way to cut your teeth, and doing this kind of process is a great way to cut your teeth on kind of like understanding glazing and understanding highlights as well. And then here we're moving on to our tippity top highlights. So with your brightest silver, what you need to do is just go around and do a little bit of edge highlighting. Now, I'm not suggesting that you edge highlight everything, but certainly the most prominent edge highlights are going to be really important here. And that is what sells the effect in particular, where you've edge highlight those key places. So you can see what it looks like now that it's been edge highlighted, and that is essentially the metallics done and the red armour done as well. So the bulk of the work, and from this point onwards, it's really going to be kind of all the little details, but all the fun stuff as well. You know, the leather on the armour, the script work as well. And this is what we're going to be aiming for. So we've got a fair bit to go, but relatively, you know, that base is quite straightforward. It doesn't take too long at all. But we've done the main bulk of the work now. And then in the next video, in part 2, you'll see me finish off this model. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really appreciate you guys watching. I often see my videos as almost like the Ryanair of painting videos. You know, it doesn't have any A or B reel. It's just really, you know, if you love painting, you want to know how I paint and how I do things, you know, these videos are for you. But hopefully this has been a detailed guide, more detailed than I would usually do on kind of any one particular area of a model. If you enjoyed it, please click the share button, please like, please subscribe. I really appreciate it. And make sure you comment. Let me know what you think of how Lorgar's looking, and let me know how this video has helped you.